Welcome everyone to our brunch today, and we're going to be discussing the report from the task force from the General Church about LGBTQIA plus matters. Just for the sake of anyone that's online, hi everyone, and everyone here. The brunch happens the first Saturday of the month generally. It's been going since 2006. And it's an outreach of the home church in Glenavon, which is an affirming congregation that's been meeting every other Sunday since 2003. So we welcome you. And let's just introduce ourselves.
So I'm Scott Nash.
Okay.
So
That's Scott Nash.
thank you for opening this up. I saw it online and I was like, I want to come and learn and participate and see where life goes.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Jay Barry. Some of you know me, some of you don't. But I'm here and I'm glad I'm here. Thanks.
I don't know if this will work. Hi, I'm Liz Cuffs. I am the tech person, so I'm talking to my own camera right now. Here we go.
Okay, Linda Odner, regular bruncher, ex-member of the General Church, general heretic, you know.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Heidi King.
I'm Huey Odner, ex-member of the General Church, Linda's husband.
I'm Irene Udner. I am their non-binary child.
Okay.
And I'm the Reverend Rosalind Taylor. I am actually a convention minister, also a member of the General Church, and welcome everyone.
And on Zoom we have
And on Zoom we have
Liza.
Liza.
Hi, I'm Liza McCollum. I'm Marion Rich McCollum's daughter, Herbert Shirley granddaughter. Good to see you all.
Good to see you,
And
Liza.
Farrell. Can you say hi? You're muted. Okay.
Here, I'm what happened to me?
We lost your camera.
But we gained your
Okay, I don't care. I am an old bruncher, and I am still a member of the General Church, but not in spirit. And that's about all. I'm living in what do you call it? Assisted care, which I could use.
Okay.
Just if you do not want to be seen or heard on Zoom, because we're recording it, you can turn off your video and mute yourself. And if you don't want to be seen or heard, if you're sitting here, you can just get out of the way of the camera and just don't say anything. But
Yeah.
what would that be? What's the point of that?
Oh, yeah.
So I just have a few opening remarks. Here we go. So I just wanted to acknowledge that culturally in the USA and actually around the world, there's been a lot more interest and anxiety about LGBTQIA issues. I'm just going to say queer from here on in because it's just too hard to say all those letters. And I might forget one or something. And so that's sort of the backdrop to all of this, and there's definitely been more attention paid to those kind of issues in the Swedenborgian community worldwide. Now, if you had attended or saw a recording of a brunch that we had a year ago, January of last year, anyway, I did sort of like survey the different organizations within the Swedenborgian community that I'm aware of. And some of them, like the New Church in Australia and the conference in England, have decided to stay out of the fray for now and haven't come out with any definitive policies or statements regarding queer issues. But the Swedenborgian Church in North America has been very in the forefront of this, and it's starting in 2015. So Swedenborgian Church in North America is conveniently known as Convention, right? Okay. They adopted a standing resolution on Swedenborgians everywhere on inclusion. That was in 2015. And then in 2018, they adopted a standing resolution on discrimination. And then in January, February issue of New Church Life in 2022, as most everybody here knows, Right Reverend Peter Buss published an article called Standing for Marriage in Today's World, a Church Perspective. And in that article, he defined marriage as only between one man and one woman. And in my reading of it, categorized queer people as sinners. And you might dispute what my conclusions are, but that's how I read his article. So then in August of 2022, Bishop Buss sent letters to the membership, and he also made a video available in which he responded to the feedback that he'd been getting about that particular article. Then and there were also letters to the editor published in that issue of New Church Life, which is the official publication of the General Church of the New Jerusalem. Also in May, in Bernathen, the head pastor, Reverend Derek Elphick, held 3 open meetings to hear people's responses to the article. And I guess it was only to the article, maybe to the responses as well, I actually forget. But anyway, so people spoke quite openly to Derek Elphick. I don't know what happened to the responses, maybe somebody here would know that, but I know that people were able to speak. Then in June of that year, 2022, convention adopted a standing resolution, welcome and support of all people in the LGBTQ+ community.
Can I ask you to repeat that, please?
In June of 2022, last year, the Swedenborgian Church of North America at the annual convention adopted a standing resolution on welcome and support of all people in the LGBTQ+ community. While I was there at that convention, I mentioned to a few people that there was a gay pride parade going on in Bernathen on June 21st, to coincide with the clergy meetings, and that met with quite a bit of surprise from people in convention. Like, what? Like, yep, it's happening in Bernathen too, more slowly, than in convention, as you might expect. Then also, I think in June of that year, maybe also coinciding with the clergy meetings, an open letter and petition to the General Church bishops, clergy, and board that had been signed by 863 people in the General Church. I'm not sure if all of those people were actually members, but affiliated in some way with the General Church. Asked for a new approach regarding queer issues that encourages more people to come to the Lord through the General Church. And there were 9 specific requests for change that were made in that document, and it was organized by Nathan Howard. Around that same time, too, Barrett Smith and Lamar Goodenow in Bernathen started holding meetings in their home, and they've had more than one. I haven't attended any of them, so I don't really know.
I think we've had at least 3.
Maybe 3.
And we had Christmas caroling.
And Christmas caroling. So there have been events in the community that support the queer community in Bernathen. And I will say that Barrett, I've heard, Barrett is surprised that he's considered the leader of the Gay Straight Alliance of Bernathen. I'm like, well, you've done a lot to help it, so anyway. So I'm just going through a bit of background to the task force report. Okay, so in response to that open letter and petition, in July of 2022, Bishop Peter Buss appointed a task force made up of bishops, clergy, and board members to examine and recommend an organizational response to the open letter. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, or wherever we want to go with it. And also in July, Jay Barry, who's with us here, started collecting General Church personal narratives of how our friends, families, and colleagues have been affected by the General Church clergy position on queer issues. And Jay, I'm so glad you're here because I'm not sure what happened to those stories.
None of you. Okay.
No. Liz and I and Bruce, why can't I remember his last name?
Conlon?
Yes.
Is it Bruce Cronland?
Cronland.
Yeah.
Yeah. We kind of came to the conclusion that the effort really needed to be led by somebody in the LGBTQ community, which I am not. And there were concerns about confidentiality issues, so I think that people were kind of like concerned, I don't want to tell my story unless I know that it's confidential. I mean, am I summarizing this right, Liz?
Yeah, we put up a web page, or something, a survey to get people, but people didn't send a lot of things in.
Yeah.
What people did send in to the Facebook page later were all their letters objecting to the task force report, so somebody has those.
So in a way, the stories really didn't come out. Again, it's a very confidential, sensitive topic, a person's individual, journey of how they express their sexual identity, let's say. And so in a way, I felt that I was not understanding the situation as deeply as I should have. I just thought those stories would be valuable, and I think they are. But again, there's personal privacy issues that I think hampered it. And Bruce did put up a website, but I don't think there was that much traction.
Okay. So then, in November of 2022, the task force report came out, and the Bishop Peter Buss sent a letter to the membership inviting responses to the report, which I think were due by the 15th of January, and people were to send them to an anonymous email, I think, info at General Church. So there was some issues there about who exactly is receiving my response and where's it going. But responses were invited. And in the Bishop Buss's letter, he reiterated that it's the one man, one woman stance on marriage in the General Church, and that he reported there was almost universal agreement amongst the clergy on that interpretation of the Swedenborgian theology and the Bible. And he also reiterated the employment standards within the General Church for people who agree with that perspective. In other words, if you don't agree to that perspective and you're employed by the General Church, you might have to evaluate that or something. But also, if you want to become an employee of any of the General Church entities, you need to sign on to those agreements, or to that understanding of the theology. So here's the changes that I believe that the task force recommended. Oh, there's copies of it over there on that table if you would like a hard copy. Yep.
I think I can try to put it up on the up here. Alright, wait a minute. But I can't do it right away. I have to.
Well, what I understood there, the changes that they recommended were to focus on employee safeguards and responsibilities, ongoing work on school and congregational policies and practices. Number 3, encouraging language that is as clear, respectful, and as helpful as possible. 4, ongoing and careful study of the Word as well as other sources of information, seeking tools to understand and support people who deal with challenges around sex and gender.
Oh, somebody else is out there. Let them in. Thank you.
So my summary of it is that the task force affirmed the freedom of membership to hold differing interpretations without disturbing the church. They denied that the General Church doesn't want queer people in the church, and that they are viewed as more sinful than other people. They denied both of those thoughts. They did affirm religious organizations' rights to do things that are otherwise unlawful, like unemployment practices. They agreed to do further study about the use of inclusive language and safe environments in schools and church communities. They considered specific ways that congregations can be welcoming to queer persons, example, small groups focusing on queer challenges. They reported that the central office is currently working on a statement of relationship document to help clarify how authority and responsibility for decision-making is shared between central offices and local congregations, for example, the use of buildings, which is partly sort of why we are meeting here in the Quaker Meeting House, because of concerns we had about meeting in our usual place, which is Kenwood Village, which is connected with the general church. So it would be helpful to have a statement of relationship, like it's okay to talk about anything in our buildings, or you cannot. Yes, all right. They also recommended that ministers research best practices for supporting the queer community and allies, that they research the science of sex and gender, all in the light of new church doctrine. They denied or recommended that the clergy be denied the opportunity to officiate same-sex marriages. And they implied that queer persons would not be admitted to theological school. They didn't actually come out and say that, but they said admission decisions to the theological school are based on aptitude as well as doctrinal convictions aligned with the general church and willingness to live accordingly. And they also repeated the statement in the order and organization document of the general church that the beliefs of members can arise from their own study of the word, aided by the teaching of priests, but there is no official doctrine that members must follow. Bishops and priests can offer their current understanding. And then, the deadline has come and gone for email or letter responses to the task force report, and many of those, as Liz mentioned, were put up on the Facebook page. And when I'm saying Facebook page, I'm referring to the Bryn Athyn Gay Straight Alliance Facebook page. I don't think there's any other really forum besides that on Facebook. So if somebody's not on Facebook, then you don't actually have access to it.
Can you say that address again?
It's called the Bryn Athyn Gay Straight Alliance. And it formed several years ago. And
Gay
it's
something alliance.
Straight.
Gay straight.
Yeah. So gay people and
So
straight
gay
people getting along
and,
together.
well, really queer people and their allies.
I think they've updated it to the Queer Straight Alliance, at least in terms of talking about it.
Oh, okay. Yes, right.
But the Facebook page still has the old name.
Yeah.
And also you can get on Tira has an email list. You can get on Tira Keel's email list. Oh, I still can't. It's very hard for me to get on screen because I'm behind the camera. But you can get on Tira Keel's email list by sending her a message on Facebook to find out about Queer Straight Alliance events that you might want to attend.
And if you're not on Facebook,
And if you're not on Facebook, what?
how would you contact her if you're not on Facebook?
Oh,
You would ask Rosalind for the email address.
yes, you would ask Rosalind for the email address.
And you could.
She also has a phone number in the directory, I suppose.
Tira has a phone number in the directory. I have a phone number in the directory, and my email is hrtaylor@temple.edu. On that Facebook page, in January of 2023, Alex Gayhart posted in that group, I am a member of General Convention and feel called to share that these anti-LGBTQ+ views and beliefs are definitely not held by all Swedenborgian ministers. The Swedenborgian Church of North America passed an LGBTQ+ embracing resolution this summer. That's what Alex said. And then similar support was offered by the Reverend Jane Siebert, who was the past president of the convention. And also a link was posted to a sermon by Reverend Kent Rogers of the Lordson Church. So Kent Rogers' sermon, which I was in a couple months ago, I believe, was the first time that I'm aware of anybody in the Lord's New Church coming up with any kind of position. I haven't heard definitely how that was received, but I would anticipate that there's some conservative members of that organization who would not have been happy with what he said, and there would be people who were very happy with what he said. And anyway, so that there is an affirming sort of sermon out there that's from the Lordson Church. And then February 8th of this year, there was a peaceful demonstration by the queer community and allies at Cairncrest in Brenathan, which I didn't attend. And I don't know, does anybody hear that? Don't really remember what stimulated that, but I believe it was very peaceful. So now Linda has maybe a few remarks about Bishop Buss's letter that was sent out inviting responses to the report. And then Jay also has something for us after Linda speaks.
All right, first of all, I just want to say that I'm so happy to see everybody here. It's just great that there are so many people who are interested and willing to make the trek, so that's just awesome. I've just been really reading the task force report and the letter that went with it from Bishop Buss with care and attention and trying to figure out what's going on, because the first thing that I noticed when I read it was that it felt like a big package that came in the mail, and I opened it and it was like packing material, more and more packing material, and I kept looking through all this shredded paper to find out the actual substance of what they were trying to say. And at first I felt cynical about that. I'm like, oh, they're just trying to like bluff and fluff their way through this without making any real commitments. And then I realized when I looked at the last page of the report.
Oh, oh no, I think that's
What's going on? Okay.
there's another person out there, but
It's just the guy.
it's just the guy who
It's
runs
like a
the
groundskeeper guy or something.
groundskeeper, yeah.
He showed me where to go in.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to take my glasses off, folks.
Do you need more light?
No, that's fine. I have enough light. I'm just nearsighted. Oh, here we are. Yes. I realized it says here the analyses in this report essentially, but not exhaustively, represent the sentiments of the task force. Where points of disagreement arose, we were able to reach a general consensus. But we acknowledge that some task force members are hoping to see clearer lines drawn and boundaries placed around matters of sex and gender, while others would see it as useful to have more variety in approaches within the general church and its affiliated organizations. This is page 6, the final page of the report. And I'm like, oh, that's why it's so short on specifics. The task force report represents what they were able to come to a consensus about. And it leaves out all the stuff that they disagreed about, which is a lot. So they did their best to come up with a document that everybody on the task force could agree with. And what they came up with was pretty, like I say, pretty thin, I would say. I mean, yeah. And I was thinking, if it was great that Bishop Buss wrote his own letter for his own point of view about that. It would be nice if a couple of task force members could also talk about their experience on the task force and, you know, what they learned and what they talked about, and express their own view about what happened, and not be constrained by the need for consensus. I think we would learn a lot more. Because reading the appendix, I realized, wow, there was a lot of material that was looked at. There was a lot of people got sources from the internet about queer issues. People created PowerPoints about this to educate people. So apparently a lot of stuff happened on the task force. But it's just
like another 8 pages of stuff.
Yeah, and that's right. It's like, so you have to kind of read between the lines to get a sense of what the task force actually did. And also, it's like, when you read the report, it's like, well, the bishop convened this task force so that it would look like he was doing something. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's like, well, when in doubt, get a committee together and talk about it. And it's like, well, yeah, that actually is a good idea, I think. Like, he didn't know how to move forward, and so he wanted to not only actually take counsel, but also give people a sense that people are talking about this and working on this, that it's not just dropping into a void. So, I mean, But when you read the task force report, it's like, well, a lot of it seems to have dropped into a void. But maybe not as much as the report makes it look like. So let me just go through, let's see. It says at the beginning of the report, Bishop Buss formed the task force with a balance of administration, clergy, and board members. I have the word balance I have underlined. I'm like questioning about that. To look at the responses in light of ongoing general church efforts to develop and improve communication processes. And I'm like, yeah, communication is good. It seems like a modest goal to just improve communication, but you know, that's what you start with, I guess. And then it talks about how the task force does not have the authority to make doctrinal statements or policy changes, which is true. A lot of communities in the general church don't have that. Like, I was on the board, the general church board, for 6 years. It didn't have power to make policy decisions. We were just supposed to make suggestions about how the money should be allocated.
Wait, suggestions? You couldn't, the board doesn't decide
Yes,
that?
yeah, the board makes some decisions about how money is allocated, but within a very narrow range. It's like, here is a proposal. Yes or no, how much? Not a lot of discussion on what the nature of the things that we're putting money into is. It's like we're given ready-made things to either say yes or no to.
Ready-made by who?
By the subcommittees. Yeah, the committees, right.
Okay.
Anyway.
Are they consisted of clergy?
Well, the general church board is majority lay people.
Okay.
Anyway, that was an interesting thing. So,
I have a question. If the board doesn't make the policy decisions, like how are they made? Who do they make recommendations to, and how those decisions?
I think it's the clergy.
The clergy decides all the policies of the general church.
Yes, the clergy does.
Can I
Yes?
correct that? Is that
Okay, go ahead. Okay.
Is that it usually goes straight to the bishop and to his little inner circle, and if it really kind of like spurs a larger conversation, then it'll come up in the clergy when they meet the next time. But it would have to be during an annual meeting, which happens every 4 years. Mostly, it's really centered on the bishop and his inner circle. That's where all the power is.
So it's even narrower than I realized.
Yes, it is.
Wow.
Linda, would you mind repeating what Jay said? Because I'm not sure. If
Right, okay. What I heard you say, Jay, was that most of the time it's the bishop himself, the executive bishop and his inner circle of people that he takes counsel with, I don't know how many people that is, who make decisions about the policy of the church. And if there's some sense that there needs to be more discussion about it, then they will wait until there's an annual ministers' meeting and bring it to the clergy.
That sounds right, yeah.
Even the clergy itself doesn't have as much decision-making power as you might think.
Oh, we have a
I
hand.
think I have a hand here.
Is that all inner circle of bishops? Is that all ministers?
Yeah, it would be the bishop's consistory. Yeah, it's all ministers.
Right. So,
I just.
yes?
It just reminds me of the government, that the United States government is very slow, and it's not maybe economically quick, but we could have had a king.
Yes.
And the kings can do whatever they want. But no, we chose democracy, which is a very messy, it's not...
it's not efficient, it's not lean, it's not, nimble.
But that's what we want. We don't want a king.
If the membership of the church got to vote and choose the bishop, then we'd be closer in line with the U.S. government.
Agreed.
And actually, the clergy can do that.
The clergy can.
The clergy can actually throw Pete out of his office if they wish.
Do it.
With the board in collusion with them.
Yeah.
Right.
So they could do that.
So the only thing that the membership can do is affirm, not affirm, or say no to electing a bishop. There's no other thing. And in addition to that, we can write letters and make a little bit of noise, but the direct political power is minimal.
Yeah, but Scott, you were
So I'm on the Bernathen Church Board still, and I was not gonna run, and now I am gonna run again. So, my kids have graduated from there, and on the Bernathen Church Board, there's a large portion of the finances. And that's, we have to make sure the organization is around for tomorrow, financially. And it is still from a legal entity, it's its own identity, right? And, there is the ability to create change within each individual congregation. And so the statement of relationships that's being worked on is the general church trying to get the local congregations to sign it. And you read it and you're like, what? And it's kind of ridiculous, but in a good way, it also creates more autonomy for the local congregations.
More what?
Autonomy?
Economy.
Autonomy.
Autonomy.
So, in that aspect, it could be a good thing, but it's really shifting all of the liability to the local congregations and trying to create this financial liability. Like, Dave and Pete won't say this, but if you read between the legal and lines of it all, it's creating a place where the general church is protected from the mistakes of the local church. So, but they still want to keep the power of saying, we want you to do this or we want you to do that, right? So the Bernathen Church Employee Handbook today is the same one as the General Church Employee Handbook that the General Church put out, but the Bernathen Church chose for that to be the same. So there is the ability to make change to that Employee Handbook, but for the most part, it is making sure that the administrators and the people at the church in the position at the Bernathen Church Cathedral, the elementary school, are people that the board supports, and then they get to run within the budget. So there is a lot of part of it, because we can't get in the weeds, and I don't believe we should, but there's also, because you just wouldn't ever get anything done, there is a place though, if you're believing this person's heading the thing in the right direction, then you just have to say, stay within this budget, So there is something also coming in the works talking about the statement of faith, which is then something that is you sign to then sign up for the values of the faith of the organization. Pete and Dave have acknowledged that's far off. But it's not, the fact that they're talking about it, it means it's not that far off in their minds, but I think they've kind of slowed down. We didn't, at the board meeting when we talked about this and they were there, it was not so much about we're going to shove this down your throats, because they recognize the disruption of what's going on. Pete verbally said there's no employment risk, and then I called him out on that. So, because and then I read this, and and I was like, wait, there's something there. So, there's more to come. I believe from the local congregations need to start speaking up and creating, I believe in being part of a greater organization. I believe there's love and unity there, and at the same time though, with the current power, executive bishop, we're not going to make the change without having a congregation or two or three or four create it. And at the same time, just to be full disclosure in this room, I believe any congregation can have their own beliefs and choices, even if it's far right and I don't agree with it. I want to create the and, right? So, so that, and I think the Bernathen Church, because of the elementary school, which is why I joined the board, can create a safer place, a more inclusive place, a more inclusive society, and allow people to still have differing beliefs. So.
Wow, there's a lot to think about in that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I just check in, can the people on Zoom hear people speaking when we don't pass the mic?
They should be able, because we have a room mic and a
Can we just ask?
speaker.
Yeah,
I can.
thank you.
Okay. And I also just want to say, there's a room mic, so I don't have to bump Linda out of the way. Just a reminder that we are recording this and we would like to be able to put the recording up on the Deborah's Tree website for other people to watch.
Yeah.
And so,
We can
nobody has
also,
said anything contentious, but we just like to not do anything libelous while we're talking. Otherwise, we won't be able to put it on.
well, we will, but it will have to be edited.
Okay, we'd have to edit it out.
Which
So
takes
anyway,
a long
I
time.
appreciate the level of restraint that you
All right.
What is Deborah's Tree? I'm sorry.
Do you want to take it away, Linda?
What, Deborah's Tree? Okay, Deborah's Tree is a website that Rosalind Taylor created to be an online presence for supporting and uplifting the voices of Swedenborgian women. And
Got it. Thank you. I just was unaware.
okay, yeah, you can find out more about that. So I guess I'm gonna try to figure out how to wrap this up. I was a little bit, the task force did sort of profess innocence, like nobody in the general church is saying that people have to believe what they say they have to believe. And I'm like, except if you're an employee, or except if people like insult you from the pulpit, or like the freedom is stated, but maybe not as, it's not really maybe carried out as much as we'd like to see. Yeah, the employment thing is kind of a biggie for me. It's like, if you're a member of a general church, or if you're employed by a general church organization, you have to profess certain beliefs, and if you change your mind, or if you really believe something different, if you express your views openly, you may be at risk of being fired. I see that as a problem, especially since they don't have any say in the policies. But people decide to be employed by the general church, but it's not just, it's a complicated decision, let's put it that way.
I've put the Deborah's Tree thing up so they can see it. So.
I also noticed that.
Oh, admit.
Someone new's here?
Robin is here.
It takes a long time for them to get around to, them to say, the task force to say, talk about the LGBTQIA plus community. They talk about issues, experiences, and even the population. Finally, in his letter to Bishop Buss at one point says the community. But
where did they go?
but he also uses the term LGBTQIA plus spectrum, which I think is a little odd because it's not really a spectrum that we're talking about. It's just
some discrete
an amalgamation of different people with divergent experiences around gender and sexual orientation. So it's not necessarily a spectrum. Calling it a spectrum makes it sound sort of like it's a problem.
Well, it's a Kinsey thing. They used to have, Kinsey had the idea that maybe people were on poles from gay to straight.
Right, that's a spectrum. The Kinsey scale is a spectrum.
A spectrum.
Okay. I wanted to say a few things about, then church facilities, Part of the problem is general church central office, they've got the purse strings, they've got the money. So I feel like if people are going to balance out that official power, that they have to either do without or find other sources of money. So Pete's letter, I found his letter to be...
Is this the original letter you're talking about?
No, I'm not talking about the article.
This is
the... Yeah, people keep calling that a letter. There's an article in New Church Life called Standing for Marriage in Today's World. That's not what I'm talking about.
This is his letter in response to the petition.
Response to open letter regarding LGBTQIA+. A letter from Bishop Buss, a personal letter from Bishop Buss. And he acknowledges that if he had it to do over again, he would do it differently. He would make it much clearer that he wasn't condemning people as sinners, which is what it sounded like. And my sense about the article was that he was trying very hard to be compassionate and respectful, but ultimately failing. Like, there was an effort there, I could see the effort, but he was constrained by whatever he was constrained by, his own thoughts, the pressures behind the scenes, which I'm not gonna like directly talk about. But of course I wanna ask him why he wasn't able to see the things that he could see now before the article was published. And, you know, I have lots of ideas about why that might be.
I have a comment about that.
Oh, okay.
So recently went to an interfaith event, which is where Bronwyn's working now.
Oh, how nice.
And there's a book out, somebody wrote a book, and it's called Dare to Understand.
Oh.
And that that spoke to me because the topic that we're talking about is, to me, so unknown that to even try to understand it, I'm sure there's many people that they just don't want to hear about it. So to dare to understand, I think that's where Bishop Best probably is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, he had a small church upbringing and
Right. Well, and
education and all this, but this is,
you have to question whether he's really in touch with the totality of the congregation and where they stand on these issues. And that would be partly because people are not encouraged to be open about them in the atmosphere, certainly not in the atmosphere of Bernathen. And
Can I comment on that letter?
yes,
who's commenting?
On page 2
We've heard it down.
of that,
okay.
on page 2 of that letter, he talks about he's perceived the value of compassion and fair treatment, the value of honoring the directives of the word, etc., and so forth. And then he says, and at the end he has a phrase which includes honoring what the word says, as if he knows.
Mm-hmm.
And he thinks he does. And that's his whole problem.
Well, I think that's the general church in general thinks it has some knowledge of what the word says, and that's kind of what it's
Yes,
based on.
that's why I've given up on trying to persuade anybody to do anything. I'm fine.
Fair enough.
And I think Jay has a comment.
Yeah, I just had a comment. Keep in mind, this is kind of more, this is not a cynical attitude. This is more of an observation of the way the organization forms itself. And when Pete Buss was voted in to be the executive bishop, I was ordained minister at the time. I was one of the ones that voted him in. He had the choice to either have no assistant bishops or have one assistant bishop. He chose 2 assistant bishops. He was anticipating this event that is happening now. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And so who did he choose? He chose David Lindruth, who in our clergy group was perceived as being kind of more on the progressive side, and then Brad Heinrichs, who was kind of like more represented the right end of the spectrum. And so he was anticipating this, hoping to, and Pete is an administrator. I know Pete very well. I was the senior pastor in his congregation, so it's not just a face-to-face friendly meeting. I saw all the work that he did in Glenview when I was the pastor there. And so he is an administrator, he's skilled, but he was trying to create a structure in the executive level of the church to have agents like Brad and like David to talk to all sides of these conflicts and then to find a consensus. That's what he's trying to do here, but he's doing it from, of course, a very isolated family system that he grew up in, and he doesn't really understand. I think he wants to understand, but his job is more important than his understanding.
Well, and I think that he recognizes that there's a range of views on this issue, the queer issue, let's say, but he just had didn't realize where the center is. Mm-hmm. Like he put the center over here where we would say is pretty far to the right, and that there's a whole bunch of other stuff that wasn't being taken into account. That's how it looks to me. Mm-hmm. And I totally I've often said, I wouldn't be the executive bishop in the general church even if I were qualified for all the tea in China. And if I were, because I've seen people be ground up in that job, and if I were, I would simply conduct myself in such a way that I would get the boot very quickly. I don't have to worry about that. But I just wanted to mention a couple other things. He talks about violence. He talks about violence against the queer community, and it's like he talks about that, and it's because it's something that the whole task force could agree on. It's like, yes, none of us want to see violence against queer people. So he's like offering that as, well, sort of as a substitute for genuinely respecting them the way they would like to be respected. And I feel like that's also a function of the necessity for what's called consensus in the task force. Like, well, we can't agree about this, and this, but we can all agree that we don't want to see violence. I'm like, okay, that's something. But it sort of feels like a bone, you know. And it's sort of a straw man, too. It's like, oh yeah, that's something that we don't want to see. So, he says, he talks about his own personal process with this, and I really, I'm actually impressed with his openness about that. And he says at one point, it is not our place as individuals to point the finger and tell others what they need to repent of. You know, yeah, we all agree that there's a thing called repentance and we're all called to it. But it's not our business to tell other people what they need to repent of. And I feel like the general church gives lip service to that. And it's a principle that I think the general church could aspire to. I mean, I feel like I don't see the general church in the near future having cathedral weddings for same-sex couples. That's just not the general church that I know. And it's like, I think that they could go a whole lot farther in accepting and welcoming the queer community without having cathedral weddings of same-sex couples. Like, there's a lot you can do short of that. But like I sort of I've given up expecting the general church to be what it's not. It's like as I said, I wrote a letter 5 years ago when Pete was confirmed about how why I voted no. I voted no to the election of Pete Buss. And one of the things I said was, we can't force the general church to be what it's not, but I also don't want to see the flowering of inclusiveness be artificially suppressed. There is a process, and it's moving in a certain direction. I see it moving in a certain direction that I want to see it move in, and it's like there's pockets of resistance, and there's pockets of we need to go faster, and it's like it's difficult to feel oneself in harmony with the providence of how things unfold. But I think we can go both ways. We can push too hard, or we can not push hard enough. And so one of the decisions that we each make is, how far are we individually going to push this process? How hard are we going to push the process, and in what ways? So, you know, there's actually a lot of other stuff that I'm not going to mention. I did actually bring copies of back 8 years ago, I guess, in 2015, when the Supreme Court ruled on same-sex marriage or marriage equality. A certain minister wrote a pastor's box about how he personally, as a general church minister, can't officiate at same-sex marriages. But if same-sex couples want to solemnize their union, he would encourage them to do so. You know, that feels like a reasonable compromise under the circumstances. And he got a lot of heat for that, and it was very disappointing to see. But
from people who didn't want that to happen?
Who didn't even want him to acknowledge that.
That was in the Post, right?
Yeah, it was in the Post. It was in the Post, right? Who didn't even want same-sex relationships to be acknowledged as anything but terrible disorder and terrible evil.
Wow.
So I'm like, there's people who feel strongly that way, and they're part of the general church, and I can't change that. Anyway, I think that's a good place for me to stop. But thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts about this.
Thank you.
Darn it.
And Jay has something to say. Do you want to come up to?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So let me just introduce myself real quick. Some of you know me. My name is Jay Barry. I'm actually, some people have told me that I'm 6th generation General Church.
Wow.
Through the Sinnesfit line, and then through the Hedston line, which goes way back to Sweden. And so I'm commenting to you as a member of the General Church. And I'm not going to leave the General Church, even though I'm very hurt by it. I put this in the past tense, I was an ordained member of the General Church clergy. But I was working in chaplaincy, where I still am. I'm a hospital chaplain in Jefferson, full-time staff chaplain, and I'm nationally board certified, which means that I had to take an oath. And that oath basically means that you serve all people without discrimination. And when they came out with that article a year ago, I immediately contacted them and said, what are you trying to do? You're trying to push me out of my job? Because I cannot serve two masters. I cannot, say I'm a board certified chaplain and keep those principles and yet belong to a church that's so discriminatory. So they were listening to me. I talked to Brad and Pete and David kind of privately, and we kind of put a Band-Aid on it for a couple months, but finally I realized it just got so bad. I said, I have to find another church to endorse me, so that I can retain my vocation. And besides, those are my values and those are my beliefs. That's the way I understand the heavenly doctrines. And so I considered going to the Episcopalian Church, which is what a lot of chaplains do. I considered the Quakers. But finally I thought, wait a minute, I'm a Swedenborgian. You know what I mean? I've always had an affinity with the Convention Church, so that's where I started conversations with them. And I'm still a member of the General Church, but I'm also a member of the Swedenborgian Church. So I abrogated my ordination on July 23rd of last year. And, that in my family system, that's the highest pinnacle of achievement. Of course, it's only for men. You know what I mean? But in my own personal dreams when I was young, that's the highest achievement you can have, to be an ordained member of the church and serve the church, serve the Lord. And I let that go. I said goodbye to that. I turned it back into them. I said, I cannot represent you in leadership in that way. So I let that go. But I'm still a member of the General Church, and I will always be until my last breath. So that's kind of the way that's where I'm coming from. But what's interesting about the task force is that it's this line. It's on page 5. Our understanding of this, and this is the task force speaking, our understanding of this is that the bishop, with a great deal of counsel, can, among other things, set expectations as a condition of employment such that pastors and other employees carry out their work in ways that are consistent with the doctrine of the church as is currently understood, period. That same control does not apply to members of the church who are not employees. And in a way, it's kind of, there's a big thing that's connected to, and that is that everything in the General Church is skewed towards the organization and the employment. And so all of the power of the General Church is really in the hands of the bishop. And the clergy, because they're employees, they are threatened. Because if you disagree with the bishop, you could actually lose your job. Let's say you have an important job where there's a school and you teach the students. So some of our teachers, in the academy or in the Bernathen Church School and other places, some of those ministers have been very intimidated. How can I actually speak my mind if I'm going to lose my job? But this is my livelihood. I have my children, my family. How can I do that? And when all this came out and I learned through Tom Klein about the Bernathen Gay Straight Alliance, I was saying, one of the points I was making is that the bishop is binding the conscience of the church. That is actually in violation of our operating principles. It went way back to 1914, I think. You cannot bind the conscience of the church. When I was ordained by Tom Klein in May of 2009, our right there on the altar in the cathedral, it said, you know, you are bound by your conscience to follow the Lord and to serve Him in the church. Basically, that's it. You know, we don't have this great big long list of expectations that we have to adhere to. Pete wants to change that, and he wants to change that because of a small group of ministers in Kempton who are very, very orthodox and conservative and literalistic in their interpretation of the word. And they have a tremendous amount of power and influence. And as good as a man as Pete is, and I love this guy, you know what I mean? He is just as conservative as they are. He's good with words, he's a loving man, you know, all those good things. But he's on their side of the line. That's why Brad is right there next to him. If he stepped down because of the pressures that he is under, and he deserves our prayers, because this is a pressure cooker that cannot even be described that he's in. If he stepped aside, guess who the bishop would be? It would be Brad, representing the Kempton arch-conservative, ultra-orthodox. Now, I don't know Brad very well, but honestly, I read the things that he's written. I read the sermons from some that have been preached in Kempton, and I know some of the history, the insider's history, because I have been an insider, you know, in leadership levels of the general church. And it's a very literalistic approach, and it doesn't conform to the values of the general church as a body, as a polity. You know what I mean? I know who we are, we know who we are. I think a lot of us are speaking out because what happened with that article is it violated our values. There's something not right about this. And how could it be printed in such a offensive way? And then how could Pete have not apologized for it? Because none of his wording after that has said, hey, listen, I'm really sorry. I really got this wrong. You know, in the hospital administration that I work with, things go wrong. And people will say, you know, I got this wrong. I got this wrong. And actually people died. But we're going to do this right next time. We're going to do this right. And so that's the kind of indication I was looking for in his responses over the past year that I have not seen. I've seen some loving words, I've seen some, oh yeah, I could have done this better, but I don't see any taking responsibility. So yeah, my brief journey over how many years? I came into theological school in 2004, I was ordained in 2009. I was assistant to the pastor in Bernathen, taught 4th graders and 7th graders, fourth graders and 7th graders. I was the director of the Bernathen Cathedral for a couple of years, which was amazing. And then I was called to Glenview. And when I was in Glenview, I saw another dimension of the church. And it's very skewed towards employment. The power rests at the top, and there's the bishop's consistory that advises you about all these things. And then there's another important element that no one ever talks about, human resources, because it's all governing employment issues. What can we do? What can we not do? How can we avoid litigation? How can we not get into a jam where they're going to be, because they just don't want to lose any money. And so the membership of the general church is kind of in the margins. It's kind of in the margins. And I think that is the evidence of that is the fact that the insensitive wording in that article in January didn't take into any of the values of our families, our friends, our members, who they might not have LGBTQ members in their family, but they have friends that they love, employers that they love. Why would I belong to a church that would violate those values to this degree in stark, problematic wording? So I think that's where this whole thing blew up. I think it was a big surprise to Pete. I don't think it was any surprise to Brad. And I think that David has been kind of like wondering, how do I fit into this? So it's been difficult, and my reading of it is that the membership of the general church has very little power in this, and that's why I suggested just something I posted yesterday on the Gay Straight Alliance about a committee. It's just an idea. I've been thinking about it for about 90 days. General Church Conscience Committee. If you look at the teachings about the human conscience, organizations don't have a conscience. They can express values that are conforming to human conscience. Even in the United Nations, if you look at the United Nations has a charter that they want everybody in the world to conform to. What word is in the center of it? Conscience. Conscience. It's amazing. Conscience is still alive, and the writings have beautiful things to say about conscience. Right there in New Jerusalem in the Heavenly Doctrine, it has a big, powerful list of things all about conscience. Well, what I see in the general church, and I can't talk about it because I was too close to these things, but what I've seen is an abrogation of conscience. Instead, it's just a relationship between the power structure of the church and our human resources department. So a lot of people fall through the cracks. And this statement is another one that says, wow, we are not in favor of this, very harsh language, marginalizing people. They didn't expect that they would get the reaction that they did. But the truth is, I think that there's a lack of awareness of our conscience, the conscience of the members of the general church, or people who've been disaffected by it and said, I'm out. They can still have their say. But, so that's why this General Church Conscience Committee I was kind of like outlining to be a mouthpiece for either individuals or groups that have been injured by the church in specific ways. These are the groups that I'm aware of that have been injured. Not just the issue we're talking about here, but also the girls in the Academy of the New Church. The girls in the Academy of the New Church. If you haven't had a daughter that's gone there, then you need to learn from the daughters that have gone there of the harmful messaging that they have received, the ways that they have been hurt, not physically, but in terms of the way conjugal love is taught. I have two daughters that informed me.
Oh, we have a hand up.
They are my teachers. So anyway, so that's one of the groups, but just to finish, that's one of the groups I'm particularly sensitive to. The board has known about this for at least 15 years, and nothing has happened.
Okay. Liza, do you have something to say?
I just wanted to add the group of disabilities has also been
Marginalized?
harmed big time and still is.
Yeah.
And she wanted to add that group in as well.
Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm not saying that Pete doesn't have a conscience, or Brad or David. These are good men. These are dedicated men. All the clergy, I think, in the general church have incredible attributes. I know them. But there's a skew in the leadership that all turns towards employment and human resources boundaries. And that is actually skewing the interpretation of doctrine too. It's a big mess. That's why they need to hear from us.
Dorothy had a question. I'm wondering if is there sort of a murky area beneath employment and the things that you were talking about conscience? Is there a murky area there that we're just not talking about, which would be the hard right position that LGBTQIA and all that falls under the commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery, and therefore in their conscience it's wrong and it's to be repented of. Do you think that's true? Because it seems like that's the divide. We can't say do we include other commandments that are broken, people who break other commandments? I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but it just feels like that's a piece of it that we don't really talk about.
Well, I mean, the way I understand it is that the heavenly doctrines are broken down into universals and specifics, or generals and particulars. And the general, universal truths of the church are that we love everyone. And that every person is born and created for heaven. Every person, doesn't matter who it is. And that they have that potential, every person. But this particular emphasis, I think, is fear-based because of the cultural changes in the United States and in the West. And they want to fall back on some platform that they feel that they can really stand on. The Mennonite church has had to do the same thing. They're splitting too. And so they fall back on their rigid interpretation of marriage. And they don't want to let it go. And it's particularly in Kempton. The beautiful thing about the Gay Straight Alliance is that so many allies, there's so many allies of that community in Bernathen, which is really wonderful. But in Kempton, they don't want to see that.
I think Heidi and then Jill.
I think Daryl?
Oh, okay.
Sure.
No, you go ahead.
Oh.
You had your hand first. That's all right.
I just want to comment, I grew up in the church and I obtained a lot of great things from the general church. I think only recently my eyes have sort of been opened to the harm that these policies or beliefs are causing. My goal is to help the church see that, and I really want to try to normalize the conversation because it's been so hidden for so long. And I kind of want to put a little pressure on the general church and say, look, you've kept yourself hidden. If you really believe in this, if you truly believe in this, then you should have no problem, announcing it to the world. And I feel like there's a lot of ministers, and I could be wrong, but I feel like there's a lot of ministers that are keeping quiet for that reason. So I don't know if it's the right thing for me to do, but I sort of want to okay, if you truly believe in it, then proclaim it. Because in this world, you're technically allowed to have a human organization where you can believe what you want as long as it doesn't do harm to other people. In this case, I believe it is doing harm. That's why I'm fighting to change it.
Thank you.
But my question to you as a former GC minister is, do you think it's appropriate to maybe ask these ministers, because they're kind of a public figure, to state what they believe on this issue?
I think it's appropriate, absolutely, but I'm not sure you're going to get many responses.
Right.
Just in reality, because my career was I painted apartments in Manhattan for 30 years. That was my career until 2009. You know what I mean? I hung wallpaper and I painted apartments for the interior design community in Manhattan. I was in that field for 40 years. 25 of them in my own business in Manhattan. I left that. The day that I was ordained, suddenly they look at you different. Like you're some kind of expert, like it's an instant PhD. It's really not. We're just ordinary guys. But the church elevates us to this crazy, and I was very uncomfortable with that. There were people in my family that even stopped talking to me once I was ordained. Because of the perception about that.
I was talking to some younger people about what people identify LGBTQ plus issues as some sort of a challenge to the Ten Commandment about adultery. And so some of the young people I was talking to say, well, what we see is a challenge to the first commandment of make no other gods before my face. That this is a graven image. This that people are, the Lord in people is, it's no longer the main thing when we are trying to control other people or say who can be, employed and who where the shame should be put and so forth. So, because I think it's important, Daryl, you're mentioning about pain or people being hurt. It's well, that must be a violation of one of the Ten Commandments, and which one is it? Murder. So, yeah, certainly murder of reputation and a sense of inclusion and connection and respect. But anyway, I just think we need to take a look at, since it seems to be that everything is being judged in very orthodox terminology and so forth, it's like, okay, where are people being hurt? What is being violated here? So that's all I have to say.
That's right. So,
Thanks, yeah.
take it over to,
So how I have tried to live with this question is, and I'd love people to comment on this, but I've been reading the Arcana. I'm almost finished the Arcana, which is,
Yay!
thank you. Every page of the Arcana talks about good and truth. And this is how I've survived. Well, my whole life and everything I love, the truth that I've been taught and have seen as good, but good is equal to truth, and without good, truth is a stone, so that's the way I've seen this, and I haven't seen it in terms of breaking a commandment. So one thing that bothers me, and I don't know what to do with this, is what is the truth of it? If you say, oh, they never said that. They never said that in the Word. The writings don't say anything about it. There's a lot of truths there that talk about it. But what is the good is obvious. That if somebody living in this complicated world is struggling, we want to love them and help them. And I'm just trying to be all about good. And I just would like a few comments on.
Well, one of the things, it just says in the heavenly doctrines that, the Lord in his essence is love, it's good. And that heaven itself is good, and that's the source of order. So love orders everything. So this is actually a focus of disorder when we're actually placing boundaries and judging people. It creates disaffection, it creates conflict, and that's what we're dealing with.
Okay. Irene, you want to go first?
Oh, Irene?
Just
Get rid of that. Hold the mic.
So I'm listening to all of this, and I heard someone mention the concept of a false idol, and I look at what the general church has been to me, and they make such a false idol out of the earthly concept of marriage.
Yes.
And it's just
It's too much.
You can't see those words in any other way. This is the one thing. And then you actually read the writings, and it's like, what if I see myself in heaven as one of the nuns? Or what if I see myself in heaven as one of the polyamorous people? Are we not welcoming those people? And I don't think that the general church really understands what welcoming has to be actually welcoming. And it just, I haven't seen myself in the church in a long time, but I look back at what I know about the writings and I say, I see myself there. I don't see myself in the general church at all anymore.
Irene, what would you need to feel really welcomed in the general church? If you could address that.
I can't. I don't know that I could, express it in details, but I do feel welcome here. I can tell you that.
That's great. All right.
Thank you. It's just so important, I think, for that doing good and stuff. I think it goes back to one of the biggest pieces that Jay was talking about was allowing safe employment. And that is something that we have, I feel called to say, you can be employed in the church school setting, and if a kid asks these questions, you're open and honest from a place of love, right? And, you know, we don't have that safety for the people running the school. And the school has so much greatness to offer.
Definitely.
And, you know, it's not like if there isn't change tomorrow that the school's gonna fall apart. But over time, it won't be the congregation and the church and the love of the community that it could be, and the greatness. So I think that, like, is one of the biggest places we're doing good in the love of the truth coincide, is to be a voice to say, let both voices be heard. Because one of the big things that my wife actually said, that it was like last summer, was if there isn't a voice opposite to the exclusivity, then it, you know, the people that have chosen to be in the middle, I'm like, I just want to see how this goes, or, you know, like, I kind of see what they're saying, but when there's not an opposite voice, then only Pete and his words are the voice, and that voice can get louder, and the people that support it feel comfortable to say something and get louder and get louder. And that's what's happened in the last year. Whereas we have to say, you know, and I think that's what we're all doing here, but we need to do, you know, this is what I'm being called to do, is say, no, we need to create a space where the people that have their livelihood can be safe as well.
Yeah, I just love what you just said, Scott. Let both voices be heard. I mean, that's powerful.
Yeah, I mean, like,
that summarizes the whole thing. Yeah. Linda?
Okay, can I just?
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much. A couple of things. I was really grateful to Bruce Henderson, who edits New Church Life, that he was willing to print my letter in response to Standing for Marriage in Today's World as submitted. I worked very hard to make it acceptable without ad hominem attacks and all that stuff. But that he published a healthy selection of views from people who disagreed with Pete very strongly. So at least there's that, and I appreciate that. Jay, I wanted to comment on what you said about how general church ministers become idealized, they're put on a pedestal, they're like almost worshipped. And you know, I've experienced that in a general church minister can opine on anything. And he's listened to, he's given more credibility just because he's a minister. And I'm like, a lot of general church ministers have opined about evolution. And I'm like, excuse me, but you guys don't know anything about evolution. You don't even realize that what's being taught in the college. That you're, that's just another thing. There was one other thing. I wanted to ask you, you said that you thought that Brad Heinrichs was not surprised by the fallout from Pete's article, and I'm not sure if this is the place for you to answer that question, but I'm very interested to hear why you think that Brad was not surprised while Pete was surprised.
Well, because Brad is kind of aligned with the Kempton ultra-Orthodox group of clergymen.
Right.
Who are kind of like really cemented in this literalistic interpretation of Scripture.
But the fallout from the left.
Yeah, why would he be able to guess it?
Why would he understand that there's going to be fallout from the left, and Pete wasn't?
I think that it's because Kempton has been kind of like difficult for a lot of years, and so they've kind of had a lot of friction that they've been going for a lot of years. So he's used to it.
Oh, I see.
So I don't think I think he's just used to the friction.
My perspective, I think he's okay with letting those people leave.
Yeah. Perfect. Absolutely
yes.
right. He's okay with letting them leave.
Yeah.
Letting them leave.
Queer people leave.
Yeah. So like he's not. He's. You know, my perspective of knowing a lot of that position is, well, this is right by their definition. Then, if they don't align, we don't want to hear them. We just leave.
Right.
Yeah. And
rude.
Daryl, I was thinking about my response to you, and to summarize it just in a nutshell, is that the ministers have a big mouthpiece, like a huge megaphone, And you can say something affirming or about your own feelings about things, speaking from your own conscience, and it can be misconstrued or twisted around by one of your congregants and create a lot of disaffection. And that's the difficulty of being a pastor in any congregation. You have to watch your toes that you don't say something that's going to bite you. And that's sad. It creates an unhealthy environment, I think. So I think thank you very much, everybody.
Jess has
Thanks,
one
Gary.
comment. Does Jess have a comment?
I had something about
Yes,
work.
I was just gonna say, in about 10 minutes we should wrap because we have to clean up and be out by 12. So I want to welcome, first of all, I want to welcome Penny.
Yeah, we have Penny Rhodes.
Yeah,
Oh,
Penny
Penny,
Rhodes has
hi.
joined us at the end.
Can't see me.
And also, yeah, to give the mic to anybody who hasn't had an opportunity to speak.
I was really intrigued about perhaps the general church moving towards some sort of statement of faith that employees would need to sign. I'd love to hear more about that. I will say I left my employment at the general church because I no longer felt in alignment with the values. And now I work at a Quaker school and it's so much better for me. And I just, in some ways, why did I stay in an environment where I didn't feel like I could be courageous, right? And that's really what we're saying. And Scott's saying both sides need to say their piece, but it takes so much courage to stick your neck out there and say, hey, the way the church is treating people is wrong. Their viewpoint is not in alignment with our core values. And guess who's sticking their neck out? And guess who's speaking up? It's our young people. It's our 6th graders. It's our high school seniors. It's our kids who are challenging the bishop and the powers that be. And that's lovely and wonderful, but why aren't the adults going along with it and sticking their heads out too a little bit? And so I think a statement of faith that you had to sign would make people, and they might be shocked at how many people would refuse to sign such a statement, and then they would no longer have a school and they would no longer have an organization if they force people to pick a side. So I say go for it. Let's see what happens.
The scary thing though is, I mean, I've got 2 daughters that we pulled them from ANC and they're at Lower Moreland now. And they're okay also not being part of an organized religion.
At all.
And I'm okay with that today. I go to New Church Live periodically. That's where I align myself within the general church's, place that I feel safe and at home. But that's something that's really interesting to see though with those high school daughters, that not having an organized religion and what is a life of, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing today, but at the same time, like that's kind of scary though to me to say, if these kids are sticking up, we're actually just creating a bunch of agnostic kids.
Or atheistic.
Or atheists.
Because they see the damage religion is doing to people.
Yeah, I mean, I know my kids believe in God, but yeah, like you're right. Some people are even going all the way to atheism. And I think religion and the love of the Lord and everything is so critical to life. So thanks for letting me say my piece.
Yeah, you lifted up something that is very important, about what can happen down the road if people feel so disaffected from the institutions that they believe represent the divine, and so then they reject the whole thing. Yeah.
On that note, I'm getting a call from my daughter.
Oh, okay.
She's reminding me that I have to be home in 8 minutes, and it's a 9-minute drive.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you all.
So much for coming. Thank you. Liz, did you have anything you want to say?
Probably one.
And then I also want to check in with people online.
I just want to say that my understanding is that when I was being raised in the general church, I had a lot of these same opinions. I will say that they weren't helpful for me because what I came to college with, I went all the way through the elementary school and high school, and I went to college at St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota, and for my first 2 years of college. And when I arrived there, I had in my brain buckets, and one bucket was people who have sex in marriage, heterosexual marriage, and the other bucket was perverts. And you can only be in one of these two buckets. And that was a big problem because it isn't a good model for the whole world and all the different people you're going to meet in it. But when I was first in that position, I made a lot of mistakes, like the bishop is making now, where somebody came out to me and I treated them appallingly and I acted like I thought they were going to assault me, and it wasn't functional. And if we're training people who are going to have to exist in that outside world for any reason, college, employment, whatever, we have to give them paradigms that work with the wider culture. And the reality is you're going to meet people in the wider culture who are different, and you're going to maybe like them and be friends. I feel sad about that woman because we had been really good friends up until she told me she was a lesbian. And then, we weren't anymore. So I regret that I did that, and I've slowly been moving on and learning more and more. And when I got to graduate school, particularly because I was in sociology, all this was, we had to study this. This was not optional. And there is a lot of science, and I find a lot of guidance in the sense of like other things that we notice that we've stigmatized in our culture. Like you can study stigma and it will give you like a really good clue about what happens when people decide this group or that group is not okay. And I realized studying this that I experienced this when I was a child because I was dyslexic. And for a couple years I was dyslexic before anyone like really knew what the problem was. And I got called a lot of bad names, right? Because my brain is different. And people thought I was stupid and dumb and slow, and the R word that we don't say anymore. And then, and I thought those things about myself too, which was really hard. And then a special ed teacher came into my life and she said, no, you're just different. You just have this thing, we're going to teach you in ways that work for you. And I think that approach, it was so helpful. Like it didn't relieve it all, but it was much better than just yelling at me because I couldn't do something that other people could do. And I feel like if you are born, or you get to the second trimester or something, and some path you go down a different way, and you come out with like a neurodivergence, right? You don't process pheromones the same way other people do, and you're attracted to your same gender. That's just another difference. You could have come out dyslexic like I did. It's not a reason to tell people they're a bad person. No, because nobody can help it the way we're born. And so, to my mind, I feel like, especially given that people are going to be raising children and taking care of children, like we need to know that this is just another difference, another thing kids can have, and it's not the end of the world, and we can make accommodations for it in our society, like the rest of society already has. In 2022, right, we have the Defense of Marriage Act, or it's called something like that. So, gay marriage is going to stay legal. It's going to stay legal, and we don't have to, so if you're different and that's what you want to do, and it doesn't impact me. It really does, it doesn't make me, I can still get straight married if I want, right?
Right, exactly.
And, people are like, oh, but it's adultery. I'm like, no. Gay people want to be married. They want to be monogamously married to each other. It's fine. They believe in monogamy too, a lot of them. So it just, the way that it's been, taught to us is like, oh, this bad thing. It doesn't align with what is actually going on in society. And so I really am anxiously looking forward to the day when more people on the clergy have gone through the trip that I did, from not knowing anything to knowing a lot of things and being cool with it and realizing oh, that way I used to look things, it was harmful and bad, and I'm glad I don't do that anymore.
Thanks, Liz.
Anybody else in the room? No?
Penny? Penny?
Yeah, Penny?
Penny?
What would you like to
Can
say?
you hear?
Yes,
we can hear you.
I came in late, I thank Liza for putting on Facebook that there was a Zoom, and I just joined, and I came in as you were speaking about Kempton. I came to Kempton 50 years ago, and this church started because a few of us came up here. I have since left the congregation because of this issue, and just want you all to know that it's not 100% of this congregation. It's sort of been hijacked by a very strong conservative voice, and the rest of the people who have children in school are in a really tough bind because their kids are in school and they're not allowed to disagree with anything. So there's I think there's a pretty large amount of us that disagree with what's going on, and there are some of us who can afford to speak out, and there are many of us not going to church anymore. I just want you to know that it's a strong ministerial voice and more than a few moneyed conservative people. That's all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Penny.
Okay, it's 11:45.
Right, I guess we better
Beryl
pack it in.
or Eliza, sorry, Liza, is that your name?
Nope, not for me. I'm good.
Okay. Beryl?
Cool.
No, I don't need anything else to say.
All right, great. See you tomorrow.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
It's been
everyone.
wonderful. If you want to relive this experience, check Deborah's tree at some point down the line. And that's it.
That's it.
Thank you.
Yay.
Oh.
Bye, everybody.
Bye,